The rusty ferry churned toward Blackmoor Island through choppy grey waters, carrying sisters Maya and Claire, 7 months pregnant and broke, to claim their inheritance. Their great Aunt Vivian had left them a worthless rock, according to the lawyer, but as the island's jagged cliffs emerged from the mist, both women felt an unexplained chill. Maya gripped the ferry's rusted railing, her knuckles white against the metal. 7 years. That's how long it had been since she'd spoken to Claire before yesterday's phone call about the inheritance. The silence between them stretched as wide as the churning water below, filled with accusations neither wanted to voice again. "I still can't believe Aunt Vivian remembered us," Claire said, adjusting her designer maternity coat despite its obvious age and wear. Even broke, she couldn't help but maintain appearances. "We barely saw her after Mom's funeral." Maya studied her sister's profile. Claire had always been the golden child, beautiful, married to a successful doctor, living the perfect life their mother had demanded. Until recently, anyway. The divorce papers and foreclosure notice Maya had glimpsed in Claire's purse told a different story. "Maybe she knew we needed it," Maya replied, though she kept her cynicism to herself. As an former investigative journalist, she corrected bitterly. She'd learned to question sudden windfalls. Nothing was ever free, especially not from family. The ferry captain, a weathered man who'd barely spoken during the 2-hour journey, finally cut the engine. "This is as close as I get," he called over the wind. "Dock's been broken for years. You'll have to take the dinghy." Claire's face paled. "A dinghy? In my condition?" Maya was already moving toward the small boat, her pregnancy making every step deliberate. "It's this or swim." She glanced back at her sister. "Unless you want to go back to sleeping in your car." The words hit their mark. Claire's jaw tightened, but she followed. 20 minutes later, they stood on a narrow strip of rocky beach, watching the ferry disappear into the mist. The island stretched before them, barren, unwelcoming, nothing but scrub brush and jagged rocks leading up to higher ground. "This is it?" Claire's voice cracked. "This is supposed to save us?" Maya shouldered her backpack, scanning the landscape with trained eyes. Something felt wrong. The island looked exactly as the lawyer had described, worthless, abandoned, forgotten. But there was an electricity in the air, a sense of being watched that made her journalist instincts prickle. They climbed the winding path in silence, their breathing labored. Maya's baby kicked against her ribs as if sensing her unease. She'd been hoping for a basic shelter, maybe a fishing cabin where she could lay low and figure out her next move. After the story that had destroyed her career, after the threats that had forced her to abandon everything, she needed time to think. But as they crested the hill, both sisters stopped dead. The villa rose before them like a mirage, impossibly elegant against the harsh landscape. Marble columns gleamed despite the overcast sky, and crystal windows reflected the grey waters beyond. Perfectly manicured gardens bloomed with flowers that shouldn't survive in this climate, on this soil. "That can't be right," Claire whispered. Maya pulled out the property documents, her hands shaking slightly. According to every description, every photograph, Blackmoor Island was barren, empty. The lawyer had been clear. There were no structures, no utilities, nothing of value, yet here stood a mansion that belonged on the French Riviera, not a forgotten rock in the North Atlantic. They approached slowly, each step revealing new impossibilities. Solar panels cleverly hidden among the roof tiles, a marble fountain bubbling with clear water, rose bushes heavy with blooms despite the approaching winter. The front door stood slightly ajar. "Should we knock?" Claire asked, though her voice suggested she already knew how ridiculous that sounded. Maya pushed the door open, her heart hammering. "Hello," she called. "Is anyone here?" The interior took their breath away. Priceless artwork lined the walls. She recognized a Monet, possibly authentic, hanging casually near the entrance. Fresh white orchids filled crystal vases, their perfume mixing with the scent of recent cooking. Everything was pristine, as if the owner had stepped out moments ago. "Maya?" Claire's voice was barely a whisper. "Look." She followed her sister's gaze to a side table where 2 manila envelopes sat. their names written in familiar spidery handwriting. Aunt Vivian's handwriting. Maya tore hers open with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of paper and an ornate brass key. "My dear girls," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've finally come home. I know you have questions. I know this seems impossible, but trust me when I say that everything you see, everything you're about to discover, has been waiting for you. The island chose you both, just as it chose me 40 years ago. The key opens the door you need to find. Be careful whom you trust. Be careful what you wish for. And remember, some secrets are worth dying for. Welcome to Blackmoor Island. Welcome to your inheritance." The ferry's engine coughed to life as Maya stepped aboard, her stomach lurching from more than just morning sickness. She clutched the worn leather satchel containing Aunt Cordelia's cryptic letter and the island's deed, documents that had arrived 3 weeks after a funeral she'd learned about too late to attend. The captain, a weathered man who introduced himself simply as Henrik, eyed her swollen belly with concern. "You sure about this trip, miss? Island's got no medical facilities. Nothing but rocks and that old house." Maya nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at her. She'd tried calling Elena twice since receiving the inheritance papers, but her sister had let both calls go to voicemail. Their last conversation, 6 months ago, had ended with Elena accusing Maya of abandoning the family business for artistic pretensions, and Maya retorting that at least she wasn't suffocating under their father's shadow. Now they were co-inheritors of Blackmoor Island, a place their great-aunt had never mentioned during her sporadic visits when they were children. The crossing took 40 minutes through increasingly choppy waters. Maya spent most of it gripping the railing, watching the mainland shrink to a grey smudge. When Blackmoor finally emerged from the mist, she understood Henrik's skepticism. The island looked like a jagged tooth jutting from the sea, its cliffs dark and forbidding. But as they rounded the eastern shore, the landscape transformed. A sheltered cove opened before them, its waters calm and surprisingly clear. Above the rocky beach, terraced gardens climbed toward an imposing stone villa that seemed to grow from the cliff itself. "Well, I'll be damned," Henrik muttered. "Haven't seen the old place looking like that in years." Maya squinted at the structure. Despite obvious age, the villa appeared remarkably well maintained. Ivy cascaded down its walls in carefully controlled patterns, and she could swear she glimpsed movement behind one of the upper windows. "Someone's been taking care of it." "Not that I know of." "Your aunt. She stopped coming out here maybe 5 years back. Told everyone the place was falling apart, not worth the maintenance costs." Henrik scratched his grizzled chin. "Course, Cordelia always was secretive about island business." As they approached the small dock, Maya spotted a figure waiting on the pier. Even at a distance, she recognized Elena's rigid posture, the way her sister held her shoulders when bracing for confrontation. Elena's pregnancy was less advanced, maybe 4 months to Maya's 6, but unmistakable beneath her expensive coat. The sisters faced each other as Henrik secured the ferry. Elena looked polished as always, her dark hair pulled into a severe chignon, makeup flawless despite the sea air. Maya suddenly felt self-conscious in her paint-stained sweater and maternity jeans. "You came," Elena said, her tone carefully neutral. "So did you. I was hoping we could handle this without—" Elena gestured vaguely at Maya's appearance. "Without complications." Maya bit back her first response. "It's good to see you too, Elena." Henrik cleared his throat. "I'll be back day after tomorrow, weather permitting. Radio's in the house if you need emergency pickup." He handed Maya her overnight bag, then addressed both sisters. "Be careful up there. Old places like that, they've got their secrets." As the ferry puttered away, the sisters stood in awkward silence. Finally, Elena picked up her sleek rolling suitcase and started up the stone path toward the villa. "How long have you been here?" Maya asked, falling into step beside her. "Since yesterday morning. I wanted to assess the property before—" Elena paused. "Before we discussed selling it." "You've already decided to sell?" "Maya, We both know this inheritance is more burden than blessing. The maintenance costs alone would be astronomical. Better to liquidate whatever value exists and divide the proceeds. They climbed past the terraced gardens, where Maya noticed something odd. Despite Henrik's claim of neglect, the plants looked healthy, even thriving. Herbs she didn't recognize grew in neat rows, and fruit trees bore unseasonable blossoms. The villa's front entrance was an arched doorway carved with symbols that seemed both ancient and oddly familiar. Elena produced an ornate brass key from her purse. "This was in the lawyer's packet with my copy of the deed," she explained, turning it in the heavy lock. The door swung open with surprising ease, revealing a grand foyer that took Maya's breath away. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across polished marble floors. A sweeping staircase curved upward, its banister carved from what looked like a single piece of dark wood. "Elena," Maya whispered, "this isn't abandoned." Her sister's face had gone pale. "I know. That's what's bothering me." Dust sheets covered furniture in the adjoining rooms, but everything underneath appeared pristine. Fresh flowers, impossible given the season, filled crystal vases on antique tables. "Someone's been living here," Maya said. Elena nodded slowly. "The question is who, and why did Aunt Cordelia want us to find them?" A soft sound echoed from somewhere deep in the house, like a door closing or footsteps on stone. Both sisters froze, listening. The sound came again, definitely footsteps, ascending from below. The salt air whipped through Elena's hair as she stood at the ferry's bow, watching Isla Perdida emerge from the morning mist like something from a fever dream. The island's jagged cliffs rose from dark waters, crowned with twisted pines that looked like they'd been sculpted by decades of storms. She pressed one hand to her swollen belly, feeling the baby's restless movements, and wondered what madness had possessed her to come here. "Still looks like a rock pile to me," came a familiar voice behind her. Elena turned to find Sophia approaching, her designer coat already wrinkled from the journey. Her sister's pregnancy was less obvious at 5 months, but Elena could see the telltale changes, the fuller face, the way she carried herself. They hadn't spoken since boarding in Barcelona, maintaining the careful distance that had defined their relationship for the past 3 years. "At least it's our rock pile now," Elena replied, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. The ferry captain, a weathered man who'd introduced himself as Miguel, cut the engine as they approached a small wooden dock that looked like it might collapse at any moment. "Señoras, I must warn you. The island has been abandoned for 15 years. There's no electricity, no running water. I can take you back to the mainland now, no charge." Sophia adjusted her sunglasses despite the overcast sky. "We'll be fine, thank you." Miguel shrugged and secured the boat. "I'll return in 3 days as arranged. The radio at the house still works if you need emergency contact." He paused, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Be careful of the eastern cliffs. The ground is unstable there." As they disembarked onto the creaking dock, Elena caught Sophia's arm. "We need to talk before we do anything else. There's nothing to discuss. We assess the property, determine its value, and split whatever we can get for it. Simple." "Nothing about this is simple, Sophia. Great-aunt Catalina disappeared without a trace, and now she's dead, after leaving us an island we didn't even know existed." Elena gestured at the overgrown path leading up from the dock. "Doesn't any of this strike you as strange?" Sophia pulled free and started up the path, her heels sinking into the sandy soil. "What strikes me as strange is that you're looking for mystery where there probably isn't any. Catalina was eccentric. She lived alone on an island for 30 years. People like that don't usually die in conventional ways." Elena followed, her hand trailing along the rusted chain that served as a railing. The path wound upward through seagrass and stunted olive trees, revealing glimpses of white stone walls ahead. "But why us? We barely knew her. She sent Christmas cards with no return address, and suddenly we're her sole heirs? Maybe because we're the only family she had left." The villa appeared around a bend in the path, and both sisters stopped, Despite 15 years of abandonment, the structure was magnificent. 3 stories of white stone and marble, with expansive terraces overlooking the Mediterranean. Bougainvillea had claimed the lower walls in brilliant purple cascades, and ivy crept around the shuttered windows like nature was trying to pull the building back into the earth. Jesus, Sophia breathed. This isn't some cottage. This is a mansion. Elena approached the heavy wooden door, noting the elaborate ironwork and the carved stone lintel above. The lawyer said worthless, but this... She tried the handle and was surprised when it turned. It's unlocked. The interior took their breath away. Dust motes danced in shafts of light streaming through gaps in the shutters, illuminating marble floors and soaring ceilings. A grand staircase curved upward, its banister carved from dark wood that still gleamed despite the years. Furniture stood shrouded in white sheets like ghosts frozen in time. Sophia pulled out her phone and began taking pictures. Even in this condition, the property has to be worth millions. The architecture alone. Elena wandered deeper into the house, drawn by something she couldn't name. The air smelled of lavender and sea salt, with an underlying mustiness that spoke of secrets kept too long. In what must have been the main salon, she found walls lined with empty picture frames, their subjects long since removed. Sophia, look at this. She stood before an ornate mirror, its silver backing spotted with age. Reflected behind her, she could see her sister moving through the space with the calculating eye of someone appraising assets. Someone cleaned this place out, deliberately. So, Catalina probably sold what she needed to over the years. Then why leave the frames? Why not take the mirror, the furniture? Elena turned from her reflection. It's like someone wanted to erase specific things while leaving everything else untouched. Sophia lowered her phone, finally paying attention. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that maybe we should find out what happened to our great-aunt before we start planning to sell her home. Elena moved toward a doorway that led deeper into the villa, starting with why she really brought us here. The baby kicked hard against Elena's ribs, as if responding to the weight of unspoken possibilities that hung in the dusty air around them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the villa's overgrown gardens as Maya stood at the kitchen window, cradling a cup of lukewarm coffee. She'd barely slept, her mind churning over the pristine condition of the house and the strange absence of dust or decay. Behind her, she could hear Elena moving around upstairs, her footsteps deliberate and measured. The kitchen itself was a masterpiece of 1920s design. Gleaming copper pots hung from wrought iron hooks, and the massive cast-iron stove looked as though it had been cleaned yesterday. Maya ran her fingers along the marble countertop, searching for any sign of age or neglect. Nothing. It was as if time had simply stopped the day their great-aunt had supposedly abandoned this place. The generator's still running, Elena announced as she entered the kitchen, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. I checked the basement. There are enough fuel reserves down there to last months. Maya turned to study her sister's face. Elena looked tired, but there was something else in her expression, a wariness that hadn't been there the day before. You went down to the basement alone? Just the upper level where the mechanical systems are. Elena poured herself a glass of water from the pristine tap. Maya, this doesn't make sense. The electrical system, the plumbing, even the phone lines, everything's been maintained. Recently, the implications hung heavy between them. Maya set down her coffee cup with trembling fingers. So either Aunt Cordelia never really left, or someone else has been taking care of this place. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. The question is why? Maya walked to the French doors that led to the garden, peering out at the overgrown pathways that snaked between crumbling stone statues. Maybe we should call the lawyer. Ask him exactly when Aunt Cordelia died, where they found her body. I tried the phone this morning. Elena joined her at the window. The line's dead, and my cell phone has no signal. A chill ran down Maya's spine despite the warm morning air. She thought about the boat captain's reluctance to stay, his hurried departure the moment their bags hit the dock. How long until the supply boat comes back? 2 weeks. They stood in silence, both processing what that meant. 2 weeks alone on an island that shouldn't exist in the condition they'd found it, with no way to communicate with the outside world. Elena broke the silence first. I found something else in the basement. She reached into a pocket and pulled out a small brass key. Its surface was worn smooth, and intricate engravings decorated its head. It was sitting on top of the electrical panel, like someone had left it there deliberately. Maya took the key, turning it over in her palm. The metal was warm, almost alive to the touch. Did you find what it opens? Not yet. But there's a whole section of the basement I couldn't access. Heavy wooden doors, all locked. Elena's voice dropped lower. Maya, I heard something down there, behind those doors, like someone moving around. The key seemed to pulse in Maya's hand, and she quickly closed her fist around it. Pipes settling. Old houses make all kinds of noises. But even as she said it, Maya didn't believe her own explanation. The house was too well maintained for settling pipes, too carefully preserved for random mechanical sounds. Elena studied her sister's face. You feel it too, don't you? Like we're being watched. Maya couldn't deny it. Since the moment they'd stepped off the boat, she'd felt eyes on them, not malevolent exactly, but intensely curious, as if the island itself was evaluating them, deciding whether they were worthy of whatever secrets it held. Maybe that's why Aunt Cordelia left this place to us, Maya said slowly, the pieces of a puzzle beginning to form in her mind. Maybe she knew we'd need whatever's down there. Elena placed a hand on Maya's shoulder. What if we're not ready for what we find? Maya looked at her sister, really looked at her. Elena's face was pale, shadows under her eyes speaking to sleepless nights that had nothing to do with pregnancy discomfort. Her marriage was crumbling, her financial situation desperate. And Maya's own circumstances weren't much better, despite her attempts to maintain a facade of control. We're both carrying the next generation of our family, Maya said quietly. Maybe that's exactly why Aunt Cordelia chose now to bring us here. Elena nodded slowly, understanding passing between them without words. Whatever lay behind those locked doors in the basement, whatever secrets this impossible villa held, they would face it together. Maya opened her palm and looked down at the brass key one more time. Its engravings seemed to shimmer in the morning light, almost like they were moving. Tonight, she said, after dark, we go down together and see what Aunt Cordelia really left us. Neither sister noticed the curtain flutter in an upstairs window, though no breeze stirred the air. The morning sun cast long shadows across the villa's overgrown garden as Elena picked her way through the tangled maze of what had once been carefully manicured hedges. Her sister's sharp words from the night before still echoed in her mind, but she'd decided to explore the grounds alone rather than endure another tense breakfast. The baby kicked restlessly, as if sensing her agitation. She paused beside a crumbling stone fountain, its cherub statue missing an arm and wearing a crown of dead vines. Something glinted in the murky water at its base. Elena knelt carefully, her growing belly making the movement awkward, and reached into the stagnant pool. Her fingers closed around a tarnished silver locket. The intricate engravings on its surface were barely visible beneath decades of oxidation, but as she rubbed away the grime with her thumb, she could make out what looked like intertwined initials, MV and RS. Inside, a photograph had long since faded to nothing more than ghostly outlines of two figures. Finding treasure already? Elena startled, nearly dropping the locket. Marcus emerged from behind an overgrown oleander bush, his expensive camera hanging around his neck. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and she wondered if he'd slept any better than she had. Just exploring, she said, slipping the locket into her pocket. Something about the discovery felt too intimate to share, even with him. The grounds are larger than they look from the house. Marcus nodded toward a weathered stone building barely visible through the vegetation. I found the old servant quarters over there. Most of the roof is caved in, but there are still some personal effects scattered around. Makes you wonder what happened here, why everyone just left. They walked together in comfortable silence, following a broken flagstone path that wound deeper into the property. Elena found herself grateful for his steady presence. Since arriving on the island, she'd felt increasingly unsettled, as if invisible eyes were watching from the shadows of every doorway. "Marcus," she said suddenly, "what do you know about Aunt Theodora's life here? Did your grandmother ever mention why she left Greece?" He stopped to photograph an ornate iron gate that stood ajar, leading to what appeared to be a private cemetery. "Not much. Gran always said Theodora was the wild one, the sister who chose adventure over family duty. There was some scandal, apparently, but you know how Greek families are about airing dirty laundry." Elena peered through the gate's rusted bars. Several weathered headstones dotted the small enclosure, their inscriptions worn smooth by decades of salt air. At the far end, a larger monument bore fresh flowers, white lilies that couldn't have been there long. "Someone's been here recently," she whispered. Marcus followed her gaze and swore softly. "That's impossible. The boat captain said no one comes to this island, that it's been abandoned for decades." They exchanged a look before Marcus pushed the gate open, its hinges protesting with a sound like a wounded animal. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs as they approached the monument. The flowers were pristine, their petals still heavy with morning dew. A small card tucked among the stems bore a single line written in Greek. "Can you read it?" Elena asked. Marcus studied the elegant script. "It says, 'Forgive me, beloved.' The date," he paused, frowning. "Yesterday's date." Elena's hand instinctively went to her belly as the baby gave another sharp kick. "Oh, we need to get back to the house now." They hurried through the overgrown garden, Elena's mind racing. Someone else was on the island, someone who knew about this place, about its history, someone who had reason to visit graves and leave messages of apology. As they reached the villa's terrace, they found Sophia standing in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. She held a yellowed envelope in her trembling hands. "Where did you find that?" Elena demanded. "It was slipped under my bedroom door sometime during the night," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's addressed to both of us, in Aunt Theodora's handwriting." Elena snatched the envelope, noting the weight of something solid inside, along with what felt like folded papers. Her name and Sophia's were indeed written in their great-aunt's distinctive script, but below their names was a line that made her blood run cold, "To be opened only if you find the locket." Her hand flew to her pocket, where the silver locket seemed to burn against her fingers. How could she have known? Sophia's eyes widened. Known what? "Elena, what aren't you telling me?" But before Elena could answer, a sound echoed from somewhere within the villa, the distinct creak of floorboards from the room directly above them. All three of them looked up at the ceiling, listening to the slow, deliberate footsteps of someone moving through the house. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there. The basement door stood before them like a mouth frozen mid-scream, its rusted hinges gleaming dully in the flashlight beam. Elena pressed her palm against her swollen belly, feeling the baby shift restlessly as if sensing her anxiety. Beside her, Maya's breathing had grown shallow, her earlier bravado evaporating in the face of whatever lay beyond that threshold. "The key fits perfectly," Maya whispered, though she made no move to turn it. Too perfectly. Elena studied her sister's profile in the dim light. "What do you mean?" "Aunt Cordelia left us that safety deposit box with this exact key. She knew we'd find this door. She wanted us to find it." Maya's voice carried a tremor Elena hadn't heard since they were children, hiding under blankets during thunderstorms. The metallic taste of fear coated Elena's tongue. "Maybe we should come back tomorrow, with proper equipment, better lighting." "No." Maya's hand shot out, gripping Elena's wrist. "Whatever's down there, it's why she left us this place. It's why our families are drowning in debt while she lived like a hermit on a fortune." Her green eyes blazed with desperate determination. "I need to know." Elena felt the familiar pull of Maya's intensity, the same magnetic force that had led them into countless childhood adventures and adolescent troubles. But this felt different, heavier, weighted with consequences they couldn't yet fathom. Maya turned the key. The lock yielded with a soft click that seemed to echo through the villa's bones. Cool air rushed up from below, carrying scents of earth and something else, something sweet and cloying that made Elena's stomach lurch. The beam of Maya's flashlight revealed stone steps descending into darkness, each one worn smooth by decades of use. "The air smells old," Elena murmured, one hand instinctively moving to cover her nose and mouth. "Stagnant or preserved." Maya's foot found the first step. "Come on." They descended slowly, Elena's hand trailing along the rough stone wall for balance. Her pregnancy made her cautious where she might once have been reckless, each step calculated to protect the life growing within her. The walls gradually changed from the villa's elegant stonework to something cruder, older, as if they were descending through layers of time itself. 15 steps down, Maya's flashlight beam suddenly expanded, illuminating a vast underground chamber that defied the island's modest proportions. Elena gasped, her voice echoing strangely in the space. The room stretched far beyond what should have been possible, its ceiling supported by carved pillars that gleamed with an oily iridescence. But it was the walls that made Elena's knees buckle. Every surface was covered in artwork, paintings, sketches, sculptures mounted on elaborate pedestals. Even in the inadequate light, she could see the masterful brushstrokes, the perfect proportions, the unmistakable signatures of artists whose works hung in the world's greatest museums. "This isn't possible," Elena breathed. "These pieces, they're supposed to be in galleries, private collections." Maya moved deeper into the chamber, her light dancing across canvas after canvas. "Look at the dates," her voice carried an edge of hysteria. "This Monet is dated 3 years after he supposedly painted water lilies. This Picasso signature, it's from his blue period, but the style is completely different." Elena's art history background kicked in despite her shock. She moved to examine a small sculpture that made her heart race. "Maya, this looks like a lost Rodin, the one that disappeared from the Paris Salon in 1897. Her fingers hovered inches from the bronze, afraid to touch something that might crumble, or might be worth more than both their mortgages combined. "There's more back here." Maya's voice came from deeper in the chamber, strangely distorted by the stone walls. "Elena, you need to see this." Elena followed the sound, navigating between easels and pedestals that created a maze of artistic treasures. She found Maya standing before a wall lined with filing cabinets, each drawer meticulously labeled with dates spanning over a century. "Provenance records," Maya said, pulling out a thick folder. "Bills of sale, authentication documents, correspondence." Her voice trailed off as she opened one file. "Elena, look at this letter. It's from 1943, addressed to our great-aunt. In German." Elena's blood chilled as she recognized the letterhead, the same eagle and swastika she'd seen in history textbooks. The letter was brief, formal, discussing the safe transportation of cultural artifacts for preservation during wartime difficulties. "Oh God," Elena whispered. "Maya, I think we're looking at stolen Nazi art. This whole collection, it's all looted pieces that disappeared during the war. The implications crashed over them like a wave. Every painting, every sculpture, every precious artifact in this chamber represented someone's stolen heritage, their plundered culture, their murdered family's treasures." Maya sank onto a nearby crate, the file spilling from her nerveless fingers. She was hiding stolen art for 60 years. "Our great-aunt was a—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Elena stared at the fortunes surrounding them. Blood money disguised as beautiful things. The basement door stood ajar, a sliver of darkness beckoning from beyond the ornate foyer. Sarah's flashlight beam wavered as she approached, her sister's footsteps echoing behind her on the marble floor. The air grew colder with each step, carrying with it a metallic scent that made her stomach clench. "Maybe we should come back tomorrow," Emma whispered, one hand protectively cradling her belly, "with better lighting." Sarah paused at the threshold, her beam illuminating the top of a stone staircase that curved downward into blackness. Every instinct screamed at her to retreat, but the memory of Aunt Helena's letter burned in her mind. "What you seek lies beneath what you see. We're here now, she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. And I need to know what she was hiding. The stairs were older than the villa itself, carved from island stone and worn smooth by decades of use. Their footsteps seemed unnaturally loud in the confined space, accompanied by the steady drip of water somewhere in the darkness ahead. Sarah counted 23 steps before they reached the bottom. Her flashlight swept across a vast underground chamber that defied everything she thought she knew about the island. The space was enormous, supported by stone pillars that disappeared into shadows above. But it wasn't empty. Jesus Christ, Emma breathed. The basement was filled with paintings, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, stacked against the walls and hanging from elaborate display systems. Sarah's beam caught glimpses of gilt frames, rich oils, and familiar signatures that made her heart race. A Monet water lily, a sketch that looked suspiciously like early Picasso, a Van Gogh sunflower that seemed to glow even in the harsh LED light. "These can't be real," Emma said, moving closer to examine a small canvas that bore Renoir's distinctive style. "Can they?" Sarah was already moving deeper into the chamber, her light revealing more impossible treasures with each step. Ancient sculptures stood sentinel between the paintings, Greek marble that should have been in museums, Egyptian artifacts that belonged in textbooks. A Ming vase sat casually on a wooden crate as if it were a garage sale find. "Look at this," she called, her voice strange in the cavernous space. Her beam had found a desk tucked into an alcove, its surface covered with papers and ledgers. She approached carefully, Emma close behind. The documents were in multiple languages: German, French, English, Italian, bills of sale, shipping manifests, letters with official seals. Sarah picked up a leather-bound ledger and opened it to a random page. Her high school German was rusty, but she could make out dates, names, and numbers. Lots of numbers. 1943, she read aloud. München, Munich. The entry listed a Degas painting, followed by what looked like an address and a series of transactions. Emma was examining another document, her face pale in the reflected light. "Sarah, look at this letterhead." She held up a piece of cream-colored paper. "Third Reich. This is Nazi correspondence." The temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Sarah's mind raced as pieces of a horrific puzzle began falling into place. The isolated island, the mysterious wealth, Aunt Helena's secretive nature, and her family's whispered conversations that always stopped when children entered the room. She was hiding stolen art, Sarah whispered. "All of this, it's stolen." "Or she was protecting it," Emma said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe she was trying to—" "Protect it from whom?" Sarah interrupted, her voice rising. "The families it was stolen from? The museums where it belongs?" She gestured wildly at the treasures surrounding them. "This isn't protection, Emma. This is a crime scene that's been frozen in time for 80 years. Emma sank onto a nearby crate, her pregnancy making the stress even more overwhelming. But why leave it to us? What did she expect us to do with all this? Sarah continued reading through the documents, her horror growing with each page. Bills of sale with suspiciously low prices, transfer documents dated during the war years. And everywhere, Helena's maiden name, or what Sarah had thought was her maiden name, appearing as a buyer, a facilitator, a ghost moving stolen treasures across borders and decades. "'Cause she was dying," Sarah said finally, "and she couldn't face taking these secrets to her grave, so she's making us decide." She looked up at her sister, the flashlight creating harsh shadows between them. "Do we return everything and face the legal consequences? Do we sell it and profit from Nazi plunder? Or do we pretend we never found it and let it rot down here forever?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of their inheritance's true nature. Above them, the villa stood as beautiful and serene as ever, but beneath their feet, surrounded by the artistic treasures of a murdered civilization, the sisters faced a choice that would define not only their own futures, but the futures of the children they carried. In the darkness, Something else caught Sarah's eye. Another door, barely visible behind a stack of paintings. The basement air felt thick with decades of secrets as Maya descended the stone steps, her phone's flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. Behind her, Elena's breathing came in sharp, anxious bursts. "Maya, maybe we should wait until morning," Elena whispered, but Maya was already halfway down. The basement stretched further than either sister had anticipated, branching into multiple chambers carved directly from the island's bedrock. The first room revealed itself as a workshop of sorts. Long tables covered with white sheets, shelves lined with glass containers filled with mysterious substances, and equipment that looked both ancient and sophisticated. Maya pulled away one of the sheets, revealing an intricate laboratory setup. Test tubes, measuring devices, and what appeared to be a microscope from the 1940s sat arranged as if someone had just stepped away moments before. What was Aunt Cordelia doing down here? Elena's voice cracked as she picked up a leather-bound journal from the nearest table. The pages crackled as she opened it, revealing their great-aunt's precise handwriting. Maya leaned closer, reading over Elena's shoulder by the phone's light. Day 847. The formula shows promise, but the side effects remain unpredictable. The subjects in town continue to show improvement, though I fear what might happen if the treatment stops. The mainland doctors would never understand, would never approve. But how can I stop when I see the children thriving? Subjects? Maya's blood ran cold. "Elena, keep reading." Elena flipped through more pages, her hands trembling. Day 901. The Hartwell baby was born healthy despite the mother's previous losses. 3 successful births, this month alone. The island women trust me now, but I carry the weight of what I'm not telling them. The compound works, but at what cost to future generations? She was experimenting on people, Elena breathed, on pregnant women. Maya snatched the journal, scanning entry after entry. Their great-aunt had been developing some kind of fertility treatment, testing it on the island's inhabitants without their full knowledge. The entries spoke of remarkable success rates, healthy births where there had been only miscarriages before, but also of disturbing mutations in animal test subjects and concerning blood work from some of the children. "Look at this," Maya said, pointing to an entry near the end. "The government men came again today. They suspect what I'm doing here. I've told them the island is barren, worthless, that I'm simply a grieving widow living alone. But they're getting closer to the truth. If they discover the compound, they'll weaponize it, or worse, destroy it entirely. The children's lives hang in the balance." Elena moved deeper into the basement, following a narrow corridor that led to another chamber. This room was different, warmer somehow, with what looked like a sophisticated climate control system humming quietly in the corners. Dozens of sealed containers lined the walls, each carefully labeled with dates and chemical formulas. "Maya," Elena called softly, "you need to see this." At the far end of the room sat a modern refrigeration unit, clearly installed much more recently than the rest of the equipment. Inside, they found vials of a clear liquid, meticulously organized and labeled with dates from just 2 years ago. She was still making it, Maya realized, right up until she died. Elena picked up another journal, this one with entries dating to just months before Cordelia's death. The girls will need to know eventually. Elena's struggles, Maya's fears, they both carry the genetic markers. The compound could help them, but they must understand the risks. The choice has to be theirs. Genetic markers for what? Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. Maya found her answer in a medical file tucked beneath the journal. Their family line carried a rare genetic condition that caused severe pregnancy complications, the same condition that had killed their grandmother, that had caused Elena's multiple miscarriages, that Maya's doctors had warned her about. But according to Cordelia's research, her compound could prevent those complications. The island's children weren't subjects, they were success stories, healthy babies born to mothers who should have lost them. "She left this for us," Maya said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. The island, a villa, everything. She knew we'd need this. Elena stared at the vials, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. But at what cost? Look at these side effects she documented. Behavioral changes in some children, accelerated aging in others. Maya, what if this stuff creates monsters instead of miracles? Maya's phone buzzed with a text message, the first signal they'd received since arriving on the island. The message was from an unknown number. You found it. Good. But you're not alone on that island anymore. They've been watching, waiting for someone to claim Cordelia's inheritance. Trust no one. Use the tunnels. A friend. Both sisters looked up from the phone, suddenly aware of how vulnerable they were in the basement's depths. Above them, the villa creaked and settled, but now every sound seemed potentially threatening. The compound offered hope, but also painted targets on their backs. The basement door stood open like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Elena clutched the brass key so tightly it left indentations in her palm as she descended the stone steps behind Maya, their footsteps echoing in the confined space. The musty air grew thicker with each step, carrying scents of aged wood, metal, and something else, something sweet and cloying that made Elena's stomach turn. Maya's flashlight beams swept across the walls, revealing shelves lined with dusty bottles and mason jars filled with murky liquids. But it was what lay beyond the makeshift storage area that made both women freeze. A laboratory, pristine and organized, as if someone had simply stepped away moments before. Stainless steel tables gleamed under fluorescent lights that hummed to life when Maya flicked a switch. Glass beakers and test tubes stood in perfect rows, some still containing crystalline residue. A microscope sat angled toward a slide, and beside it, a leather-bound journal lay open. "What the hell was Aunt Cordelia doing down here?" Maya whispered, her voice barely audible over the electrical hum. Elena approached the journal with trembling fingers. The pages were filled with Cordelia's familiar spidery handwriting, but the words made her blood run cold. Formulas, chemical compounds, and names, dozens of names with dates beside them spanning decades. "Maya, look at this." Elena's voice cracked as she read aloud. "Subject 47, Margaret Holloway, age 34, second trimester. Treatment administered successfully. Delivery complications resolved. Fee collected, $50,000. Maya snatched the journal, flipping through pages with increasing urgency. "These are all pregnant women. Look at the dates. This goes back 40 years. Her face paled as she continued reading. "Elena, some of these names, I recognize them from the society pages. Wealthy women who had miracle pregnancies after years of trying." Elena's hand moved instinctively to her belly. What kind of treatments was she giving them? They moved deeper into the laboratory, discovering cabinets filled with medical equipment and pharmaceutical supplies. Maya opened a refrigerated unit, revealing vials of clear liquid labeled with complex chemical names and dates. Some were recent, frighteningly recent. "She was still using this place," Maya breathed. "Look, this vial is dated 3 months ago." Elena found herself drawn to a filing cabinet in the corner. The top drawer was labeled Successful Interventions. Inside, she discovered medical files containing ultrasound images, blood work results, and detailed notes. The photographs showed babies, healthy, perfect babies, but the accompanying notes described conditions that should have made survival impossible. "Maya, these babies, according to the medical records, they should have died in utero. Genetic abnormalities, severe developmental issues, incompatible with life. But look at these final reports. Every single one was born healthy." Maya joined her sister, examining the files over her shoulder. "This is impossible. You can't just fix genetic disorders with some kind of treatment." But Elena was already moving to another section of files labeled Current Cases. Her heart stopped when she saw the names on the folders. Their names. With shaking hands, she pulled out 2 thick files. One bore her name, the other Maya's. Inside were copies of their medical records, ultrasound images they'd never seen before, and detailed notes about their pregnancies. Information that should have been private, impossible for Cordelia to obtain. How did she get these? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Maya stared at her own file, reading Cordelia's notes with growing horror. She knew about my baby's condition. The genetic anomaly my doctors said was... She couldn't finish the sentence. Elena read from her own file. Severe neural tube defect detected at 18 weeks. Recommend immediate intervention before condition becomes irreversible. She looked up at Maya, tears streaming down her face. Maya, what if she knew? What if she brought us here because she knew our babies were in danger? But how could she know things our own doctors haven't told us? I haven't even been back for my latest results. They continued searching, finding evidence of a network that spanned continents. Bank records showing payments from desperate families, correspondence with other practitioners in remote locations worldwide. And most chilling of all, a schedule showing appointments booked for the following week. Appointments with their names on them. Maya sank into a chair, overwhelmed. She planned this, the inheritance, the timing, bringing us here when we're both pregnant. This isn't a coincidence. Elena picked up a letter from the desk, dated just days before Cordelia's death. It was addressed to both of them, written in their great-aunt's careful script. My dear girls, Elena read aloud, if you are reading this, then you have found my life's work. I know you may not understand, but everything I have done has been to help women like you, women carrying children that the world would write off as lost causes. I have spent my life perfecting what others call impossible. The choice is now yours. But know this, without intervention, neither of your babies will survive. The treatments are ready. The procedures are safe. I have given you the tools to save them. The question is, will you use them? Elena and Maya stared at each other across the sterile laboratory, the weight of their great-aunt's revelations settling around them like a shroud. The basement door groaned on ancient hinges as Elena descended first, her phone's flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. Behind her, Maya's breathing came in shallow gasps that had nothing to do with pregnancy and everything to do with the photographs they'd found upstairs, images of women who looked disturbingly like them, dating back decades. The air feels different down here, Maya whispered, one hand protectively cradling her belly. Thicker. Elena swept her light across stone walls that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the beam. The basement stretched further than the villa's footprint should have allowed, disappearing into shadows that felt alive. Look at this masonry. This is much older than the house above. Their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the sound were being pulled deeper into the earth. Elena's light caught something metallic ahead, a heavy door set into the far wall, its surface green with verdigris. But it was what lay scattered across the floor that made both women freeze. Bones. Human bones, yellowed with age and arranged in careful patterns that suggested ritual rather than random death. We need to leave, Maya said, backing toward the stairs. Right now. But Elena was already moving toward the door, stepping carefully around the bone arrangements. Don't you see? This is why Aunt Cordelia left us the island. She wanted us to find this. Find what? A basement full of dead people? Maya's voice cracked. Elena, think about what you're saying. We're pregnant, alone on an island, and we just discovered what looks like a serial killer's trophy room. Elena reached the door and examined its surface. Strange symbols were carved deep into the metal, spirals within spirals, connected by lines that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. In the center, a handprint was etched into the surface, just the right size for a woman's palm. These symbols, Elena breathed. They were in Great-Aunt Cordelia's journals, and in the photographs upstairs, the women were wearing jewelry with these same markings. Despite every instinct screaming at her to run, Maya found herself drawn forward. The bone patterns on the floor weren't random. They formed a path leading directly to the door. How do you know about her journals? Elena's silence stretched too long. When she finally turned, her face was pale in the phone's glow. I've been researching our family history since David's diagnosis. Cordelia wasn't just our great-aunt, Maya. She was part of something much older, a tradition that's been passed down through the women in our family for generations. What kind of tradition involves a basement full of bones? The kind that might save David's life. Elena pressed her palm against the handprint on the door. Nothing happened. She tried again, pushing harder, the kind that might save both our babies. Maya grabbed Elena's wrist, pulling her hand away from the door. "Listen to yourself. You sound insane." "Do I?" "Look at me, Maya. Really look." Elena turned to face her sister fully. "I'm 37, diagnosed as infertile for 3 years, and suddenly I'm pregnant? You're 34 with premature ovarian failure, and you're carrying a baby the doctors said was impossible? We inherit this island the same week we both discover we're pregnant, and you think that's a coincidence?" The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Maya's hand moved instinctively to her belly, feeling the subtle swell that shouldn't exist. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe our great-aunt didn't just leave us an island. Maybe she left us a choice." Elena's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "Whatever happened in this place, it has something to do with fertility, with giving life. The women in those photographs, they all look like us because they are us, our ancestors." Maya stepped back, her mind reeling. "Even if that were true, and I'm not saying it is, what about the bones? What about whatever killed all these people?" Elena knelt beside one of the bone arrangements, studying it more closely. What if they weren't killed? What if they chose this? Chose what? To give their lives so that life could continue, to ensure the bloodline survived. Elena stood slowly, her expression resolute. "David is dying, Maya. The doctors give him 6 months at most. And your baby? Have you told anyone about the complications Dr. Reeves mentioned? The abnormalities in the ultrasound?" Maya's blood ran cold. She hadn't told Elena about that. Hadn't told anyone. "How do you—" "Because I'm experiencing the same thing. Both our babies are at risk. But maybe they don't have to be." Elena turned back to the door, raising her hand toward the handprint again. "Maybe this is why we're really here. Elena, don't—" But Elena had already pressed her palm firmly against the metal. This time, something responded. The door shuddered, and a grinding sound echoed through the basement as ancient mechanisms awakened. The symbols on the door began to glow with a sickly phosphorescent light, and from beyond came the sound of something vast stirring in the darkness. The basement door slammed shut behind them with a finality that made Elena's stomach drop. She yanked at the handle, her pregnant belly pressing against the cold metal as she threw her full weight into it. "It's locked," she gasped, stepping back. The dim emergency lighting cast eerie shadows across Sophia's face as her sister moved to help, both of them pushing and pulling at the door that had somehow sealed them inside. "The mechanism must be automatic," Sophia said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "When we opened that vault, it triggered something." Elena pressed her hands against her belly, feeling the baby's restless movements. The air down here felt thick, recycled. How long would their oxygen last? She pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the impossible sight before them. The vault door stood open like a mouth, revealing shelves lined with safety deposit boxes, each marked with dates spanning decades. But it wasn't the boxes that held her attention. It was the wall of photographs covering the far side of the vault. Hundreds of pictures, some black and white, others in faded color, all showing the same thing: pregnant women. "Jesus," Sophia whispered, moving closer to examine them. "Look at the dates, Elena. These go back to the 1940s. Elena joined her sister, studying the images with growing horror. Each photograph showed a woman in various stages of pregnancy, some clearly unwilling subjects caught off guard, others posed formally. Many wore expensive jewelry, elegant clothing, but their eyes held the same expression of fear and desperation Elena now felt in her own chest. "Here," Sophia said, pointing to a brass placard mounted beside the photographs. "It's some kind of registry." Elena read over her sister's shoulder, the words swimming before her eyes as their meaning became clear. Names, dates, genetic profiles, and most chilling of all, transaction records. Enormous sums of money changing hands, with cryptic notations about successful placements and genetic compatibility assessments. "This isn't just a registry," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's a catalogue. They were selling babies." Sophia's hand found Elena's arm, gripping tight. "Not just selling. Look at these genetic profiles, blood types, family medical histories, intelligence assessments. This was selective breeding, Elena. They were creating a market for designer babies decades before anyone else even thought of it." A new sound echoed through the basement, the mechanical hum of ventilation systems activating. Elena felt a slight breeze against her face and realized the air was being refreshed. Someone was monitoring them. "We need to get out of here," she said. But Sophia had moved deeper into the vault, examining the safety deposit boxes. "Wait, look at this one." Sophia pointed to a box labeled with their great-aunt's maiden name and a date from 30 years ago. The box hung open, empty except for a single envelope. Inside the envelope, Elena found a letter in their great-aunt's familiar handwriting, along with a photograph that made her knees weak. Two young women, clearly sisters, both visibly pregnant, standing in what looked like the villa's main parlor. One of the women bore an unmistakable resemblance to their mother. "That's Mom," Sophia breathed. "But who's the other woman?" Elena read the letter aloud, her voice shaking. "My dearest nieces, if you are reading this, then you have discovered what I spent my life trying to destroy. Your mother and her sister were not willing participants, but they were among the last. The organization moved its operations offshore after the authorities began asking questions. I kept these records as insurance, as proof of what happened here. The island was never worthless, it was evidence." The letter continued, revealing that their great-aunt had spent decades using her inheritance to track down and protect the children born through the island's horrific program. She had established trust funds, arranged adoptions, and systematically dismantled the network that had operated from their basement. "There's more," Elena said, her voice breaking. "She says we weren't inherited this island by chance. We were brought here because we're carrying the next generation, and someone wants to restart the program." A sudden click echoed through the basement, and both sisters spun toward the sound. One of the safety deposit boxes had opened automatically, revealing a stack of contemporary documents and a USB drive. The papers showed recent real estate transactions, DNA testing facilities, and most terrifying of all, surveillance photos of Elena and Sophia taken over the past several months. "They've been watching us," Sophia said, "planning this." The ventilation system hummed louder, and Elena noticed new sounds from above. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving purposefully through the villa. Their time was running out. "The USB drive," Elena said, grabbing it along with the documents. "We need to find another way out." As if responding to her words, a section of the vault's back wall shifted, revealing a narrow passage that seemed to lead toward the island's rocky coastline. Their great-aunt had left them more than evidence. She had left them an escape route. The footsteps above grew closer, as the sisters gathered what evidence they could carry and prepared to flee into the unknown darkness ahead. The ledger's pages crumbled at the edges as Elena turned them, each entry more damning than the last. Names, dates, amounts, all meticulously recorded in Aunt Cordelia's careful script. But it was the final entries that made her blood run cold. "Maya," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the vault's oppressive silence. "Look at this." Maya leaned over, her pregnant belly pressing against the metal table. The dates were recent, within the last 5 years, and the names listed weren't historical figures from decades past. They were contemporary, recognizable, politicians, CEOs, people who were very much alive. She was still doing it, Maya breathed, right up until she died. Elena's hands trembled as she flipped to the very last page. There, in Cordelia's distinctive handwriting, were 2 names that made the world tilt sideways: Elena Hartwell and Maya Chen Hartwell. Below their names was a single word: insurance. The implications crashed over Elena like a wave. Their inheritance wasn't a gift, it was a trap. Cordelia had orchestrated everything, ensuring that when the authorities finally caught up with her operation, her grandnieces would be perfectly positioned to take the fall. A sound from above made them both freeze. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, moving across the villa's main floor. "We need to go," Maya whispered urgently. "Now." Elena grabbed the ledger, stuffing it into her jacket. They'd need evidence of what they'd found, proof of Cordelia's crimes and their own innocence. As they moved toward the vault door, more sounds drifted down from above. Voices, multiple people. "The police?" Elena mouthed. Maya shook her head. Too quiet, too coordinated. They crept through the basement laboratory, past the sophisticated equipment that now made terrible sense. This wasn't just a hideout, it was a production facility. The island's isolation, the villa's hidden basement, even the lack of modern utilities that kept casual visitors away. Every detail had been carefully planned. The stairs creaked ominously as they climbed. Elena's heart hammered so loudly she was certain whoever was upstairs would hear it. Behind her, Maya's breathing had become labored, the stress and physical exertion taking their toll. At the basement door, Elena pressed her ear against the wood. The voices were clearer now, speaking in clipped, professional tones. Not police, something else entirely. Sweep the entire property. If they found anything, the old woman was too careful. She wouldn't have left loose ends, except for the nieces. They're here somewhere. Elena's blood turned to ice. These people weren't here to investigate. They were here to clean up, to eliminate the loose ends that Cordelia had apparently failed to tie off before her death. She turned to Maya, whose face had gone pale. They were trapped. The basement was a dead end, and the people upstairs clearly weren't planning to let them walk away with what they'd discovered. Maya gripped Elena's arm, pointing toward a corner of the basement they hadn't fully explored. Hidden behind a stack of crates was another door, smaller and partially concealed. Elena's heart leaped with hope until she realized it might just lead to another dead end. They had no choice. Moving as quietly as possible, they made their way to the hidden door. Elena's fingers found the handle, turned it slowly. The door opened onto a narrow tunnel, carved directly into the island's rock foundation. Stale air rushed out, carrying the scent of salt water. An escape route. Of course, Cordelia would have planned for this contingency. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person, and Maya's pregnancy would make the passage even more challenging. But as footsteps began descending the stairs to the basement, they had no other option. "Stay close," Elena whispered, pulling out her phone's flashlight. The weak beam barely penetrated the tunnel's darkness, but it was enough to see that the passage sloped downward, presumably toward the island's coastline. Behind them, voices erupted in the basement. They'd been discovered. "Move," Elena urged, helping Maya into the tunnel. The passage seemed to stretch forever. Elena's phone light flickered ominously, the battery nearly dead. Maya's breathing grew more labored with each step, and Elena realized with growing horror that the stress might trigger premature labor. Just when Elena thought they couldn't go any further, the tunnel opened into a small cave. Natural light filtered in from an opening that faced the sea. They'd reached the island's hidden harbor, a natural cove completely invisible from the main approach, and there, bobbing in the gentle waves, was a small motorboat. Elena stared at it in disbelief. Even in death, Cordelia was still pulling strings, still controlling their fate. The boat was their salvation, but it was also proof that their great-aunt had anticipated this exact scenario. She'd known that one day someone would come for her secrets, and she'd prepared accordingly. "Elena," Maya gasped, doubling over, I think something's wrong." Looking down, Elena saw the spreading stain on Maya's pants. Her water had broken. The generator's hum filled the basement as Maya worked frantically at the computer terminal, her fingers flying across the keys while sweat beaded on her forehead. The financial records scrolled past, numbered accounts, shell companies, transactions that spanned decades. Each entry represented another piece of their great-aunt's elaborate scheme. "There," she whispered, highlighting a series of transfers. Delacroix Holdings, Sterling Maritime, Pacific Trust Corporation. They're all connected, all funneling money back to one source. Sarah leaned over her shoulder, studying the screen despite her exhaustion. The past hour of revelations had drained them both, but the weight of what they'd discovered demanded action. How much are we talking about? Conservative estimate, 200 million. Maybe more. Maya's voice was hollow. Aunt Cordelia wasn't just involved in whatever happened here, she was orchestrating it. A sound from upstairs made them both freeze. Footsteps on the villa's main floor, deliberate and measured. Sarah grabbed Maya's arm, her grip tight with panic. They'd been so focused on the computer system that they'd forgotten to monitor the surveillance feeds. The boat, Sarah mouthed silently. Maya nodded, minimizing the financial records and pulling up the security cameras. The screens flickered, showing empty rooms until she found the source of the sound. A figure moved through the villa's grand foyer, tall, wearing dark clothes, face obscured by shadows. "We need to get out of here," Maya whispered, already copying files to a portable drive. The transfer seemed agonizingly slow, the progress bar crawling forward while the footsteps above grew closer. Sarah was already gathering the documents they'd found, stuffing them into a weatherproof bag. Her hands shook as she worked, and Maya could see the strain etched in every line of her face. The pregnancy was taking its toll, especially under this stress. 70%, Maya muttered, watching the file transfer. Come on, come on! The footsteps had stopped. On the security feed, the figure stood at the top of the basement stairs, one hand on the door they'd left ajar. Maya felt her heart hammer against her ribs as she watched the stranger test the handle, then begin descending. Time's up. She yanked the drive free at 85% and killed the monitor. The basement plunged into deeper shadow as they grabbed their supplies and headed for the tunnel. Behind them, light spilled down the staircase as someone opened the door fully. Maya pushed Sarah ahead of her into the narrow passage, grateful that they'd explored this route earlier. The tunnel stretched away from the villa, carved from living rock and reinforced with timber that creaked ominously under the island's weight. "Wait!" Sarah stopped suddenly, pressing herself against the tunnel wall. "Listen." Maya strained her ears and heard it. Another set of footsteps, but these were coming from ahead of them, from the direction of the beach. They were trapped. "The storage room," Maya whispered, remembering a branching passage they'd passed. They backtracked carefully, feeling along the walls until Maya's fingers found the opening. It was barely large enough for them to squeeze through, and Sarah's pregnant belly made it even more challenging. The small chamber beyond was filled with wooden crates and metal containers, all bearing the same corporate logos they'd seen in the financial records. Maya pried open the nearest box and bit back a gasp. Inside, nestled in protective foam, were vials of clear liquid and detailed documentation. "Research samples," Sarah breathed, reading over Maya's shoulder. "Human trials, genetic modifications, enhancement protocols." Her voice grew horrified. "Maya, these are people, real people with names and addresses." The implications hit Maya like a physical blow. Their great-aunt hadn't just been managing money, she'd been coordinating human experimentation. The island wasn't just a hiding place, it was a laboratory, and these vials contained the evidence. Voices echoed from the main tunnel now, two people conferring in low tones. Maya caught fragments. Files had been accessed, and can't have gone far. The speakers were coordinating a search. Maya grabbed several vials and their documentation, adding them to Sarah's bag. Whatever else happened, they needed this evidence to survive long enough to expose the truth. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Pharmaceutical companies, government contractors, private research facilities, all connected through Cordelia's network. "There's another way out," Sarah whispered, pointing to a ventilation grate near the ceiling. "It has to lead somewhere." The grate was old but sturdy, held in place by corroded screws that Maya worked loose with trembling fingers. The shaft beyond was tight but navigable, angling upward toward what she hoped was the surface. As they climbed, Maya's mind raced through everything they'd learned. The inheritance wasn't random. Cordelia had chosen them specifically, two pregnant women who would understand the true horror of what they'd discovered. But why? Guilt? Or something more calculated? The shaft ended at another grate, this one opening onto a rocky outcrop behind the villa. Through the metal slats, Maya could see their boat bobbing in the moonlight, seemingly unguarded, but she knew better than to trust appearances now. Below them, the hunt continued, and somewhere in the darkness, the answers to their family's deepest secrets waited to either save them or destroy them completely. The envelope trembled in Elena's hands as she broke the wax seal, the crimson fragments falling like dried blood onto the basement floor. Inside, her great-aunt's spidery handwriting covered 3 pages of yellowed parchment, the ink faded but still legible in the harsh fluorescent light. "My dearest Elena and Sophia," she read aloud, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "If you are reading this, then you have found what I could never bring myself to destroy, nor bear to keep." Sophia pressed closer, one hand instinctively protective over her swollen belly. The baby kicked, as if sensing the tension that crackled between them like electricity. Around them, the basement's secrets lay exposed, the medical equipment, the files, the photographs that painted a picture neither sister had been prepared to see. Elena continued reading, her voice growing stronger with each word. "What you have discovered in this room represents both my greatest shame and my most profound act of love. For 60 years I have carried the weight of what happened here, what I allowed to happen, and what I finally chose to stop." The letter detailed how their great-aunt Magdalena had arrived on the island in 1962 as a young nurse, believing she was coming to work at a private medical retreat for wealthy families. Instead, she found herself trapped in something far more sinister, a clandestine operation where desperate women came to surrender their unwanted pregnancies, not for adoption, but for experimentation. "The doctor who ran this place," Elena read, her voice barely above a whisper, "convinced these women that their babies would be given to loving families. Instead, he used them for his research into genetic manipulation, trying to create what he called perfect specimens. Most of the infants didn't survive. Those who did..." Sophia's gasp cut through the silence. "The children in the photographs," she whispered, remembering the images they'd found earlier. Dozens of babies with identification numbers instead of names, their eyes vacant and haunting. Elena nodded grimly and continued. "I participated in this horror for 3 years before I understood the true scope of what was happening. When I finally gathered the courage to act, I waited until the doctor left for the mainland, then helped the remaining children escape. I burned most of the records, but I couldn't bring myself to destroy everything. The families of these lost children deserved to know the truth, even if I lacked the courage to tell them myself." The letter went on to explain how Magdalena had used the doctor's own research notes against him, threatening exposure unless he abandoned the island forever. She had remained as the sole guardian of the secrets buried in the villa's basement, unable to leave, unable to forget. "But why us?" Sophia asked, her voice thick with emotion. "Why leave this burden to us?" Elena's eyes scanned ahead before she read the final section aloud. "I chose you both because you understand the precious nature of life growing within you. You know that children are not experiments or commodities, but miracles deserving of love and protection. The island holds more than secrets. Hidden in the foundation of the villa is the doctor's private fortune, money stolen from the families who trusted him with their most vulnerable moments. This wealth belongs to the survivors and the families of those who were lost." Sophia sank into one of the old chairs, overwhelmed by the magnitude of their inheritance. "Millions of dollars," she said, thinking of the financial documents they'd discovered. "All of it blood money." "She's giving us the choice," Elena realized, studying the letter's final paragraph. "We can take the money and disappear, or we can use it to make things right, to find the survivors, to tell their stories, to ensure this never happens again." The basement fell silent, except for the distant sound of waves crashing against the island's rocky shore. Both sisters were lost in thought, feeling the weight of their unborn children and the ghosts of those who had suffered in this very room. Finally, Sophia spoke. "I know what we have to do." Elena looked at her sister, seeing something in her eyes that hadn't been there since they'd arrived on the island. Determination mixed with purpose. Despite everything that had driven them apart over the years, despite the secrets and resentments that had festered between them, they were united in this moment by something larger than their personal grievances. "The lawyer," Elena said suddenly. "Marcus knew, didn't he? That's why he was so insistent we come here together, why he couldn't just handle the inheritance remotely." Sophia nodded slowly. "Magdalena must have told him everything, made him promise to ensure we'd find this room, read this letter." Elena folded the letter carefully, treating it like the sacred document it had become. Around them, the basement seemed less menacing now, transformed from a chamber of horrors into something else entirely, a repository of truth waiting to be acknowledged, a wrong waiting to be righted. "We're going to need help," Elena said finally. "Investigators, lawyers, people who specialize in finding the lost." "Then we'd better get started," Sophia replied, struggling to her feet with Elena's assistance. For the first time in years, the sisters moved in perfect synchronization, bound together by purpose and the promise of justice for those who could no longer speak for themselves. The basement felt different now, as if the very air had shifted with the weight of their discovery. Elena clutched the leather journal against her chest while Sophia worked frantically at the old computer terminal, her fingers flying across the keys with surprising dexterity for someone 8 months pregnant. "There," Sophia breathed, stepping back from the glowing screen. "I've accessed the main database. Elena, you need to see this." Elena moved closer, still processing everything they'd uncovered about their great-aunt's true identity. The journal had revealed that Aunt Miriam wasn't just an eccentric recluse. She'd been Dr. Miriam Blackwood, a brilliant geneticist who disappeared from the scientific community 15 years ago amid controversy over her radical research into hereditary diseases. The computer screen displayed file after file of medical records, genetic sequences, and research notes. But what made Elena's blood run cold were the names at the top of each file, their family names, going back generations. "She was tracking our bloodline," Elena whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly. "But why?" Sophia scrolled through the data, her face growing paler with each passing moment. "Look at this genetic marker. It appears in every generation of our family. Mom had it, grandmother had it, and according to these tests—" She paused, her voice catching. "We both carry it." "What kind of marker?" Elena demanded, though part of her already dreaded the answer. Before Sophia could respond, a new sound echoed through the basement, footsteps on the stairs above them. Heavy, deliberate footsteps that definitely didn't belong to the caretaker they'd met earlier. The sisters exchanged a terrified glance. They'd told no one about their discovery, had been careful to approach the villa unseen. Elena quickly closed the journal and shoved it into her jacket, while Sophia frantically began copying files to a USB drive she'd found among the equipment. "Almost done," Sophia whispered, her hands shaking as the progress bar crept forward. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by voices. At least 2 people, maybe more. Elena could make out fragments of conversation, enough to understand they were looking for something, or someone. Dr. Blackwood's research was never supposed to surface. A man's voice carried down the stairs. "The Foundation has too much invested to let these amateurs stumble onto everything." Elena felt ice form in her veins. The Foundation, she remembered that name from the journal entries. The mysterious organization that had funded Aunt Miriam's research before everything went wrong. Sophia yanked the USB drive from the computer and quickly powered it down. In the sudden darkness, the only light came from the small windows near the basement ceiling, casting long shadows across the laboratory equipment. "This way," Elena whispered, remembering the second exit they'd discovered earlier, a passage that led to the villa's wine cellar. They moved as quietly as possible, but Elena's pregnancy made stealth difficult, and she accidentally knocked into a metal cart, sending instruments clattering to the floor. The voices upstairs stopped. "Basement," someone said curtly, and the footsteps began moving with purpose. The sisters reached the hidden passage, just as flashlight beams began dancing down the basement stairs. Elena squeezed through the narrow opening first, grateful for Sophia's steadying hand on her back. The passage was cramped and musty, clearly unused for years, but it led them away from immediate danger. They emerged in the villa's old wine cellar, surrounded by empty racks and broken bottles. Through a small window, Elena could see their rental boat still anchored in the cove below, but the path down to the shore felt impossibly exposed now. "We need to get back to the mainland," Sophia whispered, checking her phone for signal. Nothing. The island's isolation, which had once felt peaceful, now felt like a trap. Elena opened the journal again, searching for any mention of other ways off the island. Her great-aunt had been paranoid in her final years, according to the entries, convinced that the Foundation was monitoring her every move. There had to be a backup plan. "Here," she said, pointing to a hand-drawn map tucked between the journal's pages. She mentions a second boat hidden in a cave on the north side of the island. "But Sophia," Elena grabbed her sister's arm, "we need to talk about what we found down there, the genetic marker, the research. What was she really doing?" Sophia's face was grim. From what I could understand, she wasn't just tracking our bloodline. She was trying to fix it. That genetic marker, it's linked to a hereditary condition that manifests in the third trimester of pregnancy, something that could be fatal to both mother and child. Elena's world tilted. "Are you saying our babies?" "I'm saying Aunt Miriam left us this island for a reason. The research, the cure she was developing, it's all here. But now there are people who want to make sure we never use it." Above them, they could hear voices spreading throughout the villa, searching room by room. Time was running out, and the sisters faced an impossible choice: flee with incomplete information, or risk everything to uncover the full truth about their inheritance and what it might mean for their unborn children. The sound of helicopter rotors cutting through the dawn air sent both sisters scrambling to their feet. Through the villa's grimy windows, they watched as a sleek black aircraft descended toward the island's rocky shore, kicking up clouds of sand and debris. "How did they find us so quickly?" Elena gasped, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Marcus was already gathering the documents they'd discovered, his movements sharp and efficient. "Someone's been tracking us. The moment we accessed Aunt Cordelia's safety deposit box, we triggered something." Sophie pressed herself against the window frame, watching as 4 figures in dark suits emerged from the helicopter. Even from this distance, she could see they moved with military precision, their faces hidden behind sunglasses despite the early morning light. "The basement," Marcus said urgently. "There might be another way out through the old wine cellar. Cordelia mentioned something about emergency exits in her letters." They descended into the villa's depths once more, the familiar musty smell now tinged with their rising panic. The basement felt different in daylight, filtering through small, high windows. Less mysterious, more desperate. Sophie's pregnancy made each step down the stone stairs an effort, her body protesting the sudden movement. Elena led the way with her phone's flashlight, illuminating the walls they'd examined so carefully the night before. "Here," she called softly, running her hands along what appeared to be a solid stone wall. "There's a draft coming from behind this section." Marcus joined her, pressing his shoulder against various stones until they heard a grinding noise. A narrow section of the wall swung inward, revealing a tunnel that disappeared into darkness. "Cordelia really was paranoid," Sophie whispered. But there was admiration in her voice now rather than confusion. Above them, they heard the villa's front door splinter open, followed by heavy footsteps crossing the marble floors. Voices echoed down, clipped professional tones that sent chills down Sophie's spine. "Search every room." They couldn't have gotten far. The sisters exchanged glances before slipping into the tunnel, Marcus pulling the stone door closed behind them. The passage was narrow and low, forcing them to move in single file through air that tasted of salt and earth. Sophie's breathing grew labored, but Elena's hand found hers in the darkness, offering silent support. The tunnel seemed to stretch forever, occasionally branching into smaller passages that Marcus marked mentally for potential escape routes. Finally, they emerged behind a curtain of hanging vines into a hidden cove on the island's far side, where waves lapped gently against black volcanic rocks. Cordelia thought of everything, Elena breathed, looking back at the cleverly concealed entrance. But their relief was short-lived. The sound of the helicopter's rotors grew louder, and within minutes the aircraft appeared over the villa, beginning a systematic search pattern across the island. Marcus pulled out a waterproof phone from his jacket. "I'm calling in backup, people I trust from my journalism contacts, investigators who've been following Meridian Industries for years. Will they get here in time?" Sophie asked, watching the helicopter circle closer to their position. "They have to." His fingers moved quickly across the screen. "But we need to stay hidden until then. And we need to decide what we're going to do with what we've found." Elena clutched the folder of documents they'd salvaged from the basement. "These aren't just about pharmaceutical patents. They're about genetic research, experimental treatments on pregnant women." Cordelia wasn't just Aunt Cordelia. She was Dr. Cordelia Blackwood, one of the lead researchers before she disappeared. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. Their great-aunt hadn't left them the island as an inheritance. She'd left them a responsibility. The basement laboratory hadn't been abandoned. It had been preserved, waiting for the right moment to reveal decades of evidence about illegal, human experimentation. "The men pursuing us," Sophie said slowly, "they're not just corporate security. They're covering up something much bigger." The helicopter's search pattern was tightening, and they could hear boots on the rocky shore as ground teams spread out from the villa. Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming message, and his face hardened as he read it. "What is it?" Elena whispered. "My contact says Meridian Industries has been tracking pregnant women who might be descendants of their original test subjects. They've been watching our families for generations." He looked at both sisters with growing understanding. "Your pregnancies aren't coincidental timing. You're the second generation they've been waiting to study." The sound of voices grew closer, echoing off the cove's walls. Sophie felt her baby kick as if responding to her spiking adrenaline, and she realized that everything, their estrangement, their reconciliation, their discovery of the island, had been leading to this moment. "Whatever happens next," she whispered to Elena, "we protect what we've found, and we protect our children." Elena nodded, her grip tightening on both the documents and her sister's hand. In the distance, they could hear boats approaching from the sea. The emergency radio crackled to life as Elena's fingers trembled over the controls. Static filled the underground chamber, mixing with the sound of their ragged breathing. Above them, footsteps echoed through the villa, heavy, deliberate, searching. "Mayday, Mayday," Elena whispered into the microphone. This is Elena Reyes on Isla de los Secretos. We need immediate assistance." Sarah grabbed her sister's arm. "They'll hear you." But Elena pressed on. "There are armed men on the island. We're trapped in—" A burst of static cut her off, followed by a professional voice. "This is Coast Guard Station Miami. Identify yourself and your location." "Elena and Sarah Reyes. We inherited this island from Catalina Montenegro. We found—" Elena's voice caught as she looked at the documents scattered around them. "We found evidence of human trafficking operations. People are being held here." Sarah's eyes widened as the full horror of their discovery settled in. The basement wasn't just a repository of their great-aunt's secrets. It was a nerve center for something far more sinister. The shipping manifests, the false passports, the financial records detailing payments to corrupt officials, it painted a picture, an operation that had been running for decades. "Copy that. We have your location. Coast Guard cutters are en route, ETA 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Elena looked at Sarah, seeing her own fear reflected in her sister's face. Above them, the footsteps had stopped. The silence was somehow worse than the searching. Sarah moved to a filing cabinet they hadn't yet opened, her hands shaking as she pulled out more folders. "Elena, look at this!" Her voice was barely audible. Financial transfers, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and these names. Elena peered over Sarah's shoulder. The documents showed wire transfers dating back 20 years, payments made to accounts in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Panama. But it was the signature at the bottom that made Elena's blood run cold. Catalina Montenegro. She wasn't trying to stop this, Sarah whispered. She was part of it. The radio crackled again. "Miss Reyes, please advise, are there currently victims on the island requiring medical assistance?" Elena and Sarah exchanged glances. They hadn't found anyone else, but the recent dates on some documents suggested the operation was still active. We don't know," Elena responded. "The compound is large. There could be others." A new sound reached them from above, voices, urgent and angry, speaking in rapid Spanish. Elena caught fragments. "Find them, the basement, before the authorities arrive." "They know," Sarah mouthed. Elena began stuffing documents into a waterproof bag she found in one of the cabinets. If something happened to them, at least there would be evidence. Sarah helped, grabbing photographs, financial records, anything that could expose the scope of the operation. As they worked, Elena found herself thinking about their great-aunt's letter. "Your inheritance comes with both a burden and an opportunity to set things right." Now it made terrible sense. Catalina had been part of this nightmare, but in the end she'd wanted it to stop. She'd left the island to them knowing they would discover the truth. "Elena," Sarah said urgently, pointing to a wall map marked with shipping routes. Red pins marked locations throughout the Caribbean and Central America. Blue pins marked what appeared to be safe houses in Miami, New York, and Los Angeles. The scope was staggering. A metal clang echoed from somewhere in the villa, the sound of the basement door being found. Elena grabbed the radio. "Coast Guard, they're coming down. We're in an underground chamber beneath the main villa. If you don't hear from us, stay calm," the voice responded. "We've contacted local law enforcement. Help is coming." But they both knew local law enforcement might be compromised. The documents had shown payments to officials throughout the region. Sarah moved to what looked like a secondary exit, a narrow tunnel leading into darkness. "Elena, here. This might lead to the shore." Elena shouldered the bag of evidence and followed her sister into the tunnel. Behind them, they heard the basement door crash open, followed by shouts and the beam of flashlights cutting through the darkness. The tunnel was narrow and damp, clearly hand-carved from the rocky foundation of the island. Their phones provided minimal light as they crawled forward, Sarah's pregnant belly making progress difficult. Elena stayed close behind, listening for sounds of pursuit. After what felt like an eternity, they saw natural light ahead. The tunnel opened onto a small cave at the island's shore, hidden by overhanging rocks. Waves crashed against the entrance, and in the distance, they could see the white hull of a Coast Guard cutter approaching fast. "There," Elena pointed. "We made it." But as they emerged from the cave, a figure stepped out from behind the rocks. Marcus, the man who had brought them to the island, stood with a gun drawn. "I'm sorry, ladies," he said, his earlier charm completely gone, "but you've seen too much." The morning sun cast long shadows across the villa's terrace as Maya and Elena sat side by side, watching the first ferry in decades approach their island. The distant hum of the boat's engine seemed to vibrate through the stone beneath them, a sound that would have terrified them just weeks ago. Now it brought only anticipation. "Are you ready for this?" Elena asked, her hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly. At 7 months, her pregnancy had become beautifully prominent, a stark contrast to the fear and uncertainty that had brought her here. Maya nodded, her own hand mirroring her sister's gesture. "As ready as anyone can be to change the world, I suppose." She laughed softly, the sound carrying none of the bitterness that had defined their relationship for so many years. Great-aunt Cordelia knew exactly what she was doing, didn't she? The ferry grew larger on the horizon, carrying the first team of researchers, doctors, and journalists who would help them share Cordelia's discovery with the world. The basement laboratory, with its revolutionary medical research and detailed documentation of treatments that could transform maternal health care, would no longer be a secret buried beneath layers of family shame and mystery. Elena reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. I keep thinking about what she wrote in that final letter, about how she watched our family tear itself apart over money and pride, while she was here trying to save lives. 40 years of research, Maya whispered, still awed by the magnitude of what they'd found. 40 years of developing treatments for pregnancy complications, genetic disorders, infant mortality, all of it hidden away because she was afraid of what our family would do with it. The discovery had been overwhelming at first. The basement laboratory, pristine and fully functional, contained decades of Cordelia's work as a brilliant but reclusive scientist. She'd used her inheritance to fund research that major pharmaceutical companies had deemed unprofitable, focusing on conditions that affected women and children in developing nations. Her techniques for preventing maternal mortality were revolutionary, her genetic therapies for rare childhood diseases unprecedented. But Cordelia had lived through enough family feuds to know that releasing such valuable research through their family's network would result in patents being locked away, treatments being priced beyond reach of those who needed them most. So she'd waited, planned, and chosen the two family members she believed would honor her true intentions. "The reporters will want to know about the will," Elena said, watching the ferry navigate the rocky approach to their small dock. "About why she left it to us specifically." Maya smiled, remembering the letter they'd found with Cordelia's research notes. Their great-aunt had been watching them both from afar, Maya's work with underprivileged communities, Elena's advocacy for women's health rights. She'd seen past their surface-level estrangement to the shared values that had driven them apart from the rest of their material-focused family. "Let them ask," Maya replied. "The truth is better than anything we could make up." The ferry docked with a gentle bump against the wooden pier that Maya and Elena had spent the last 2 weeks repairing. They'd also managed to restore power to the villa's main floors, clean years of neglect from the elegant rooms, and create a proper entrance to the laboratory that maintained its sterile environment while allowing access for the research teams who would help them continue Cordelia's work. Dr. Sarah Chen was the first to step onto the dock, her team of epidemiologists and maternal health specialists following close behind. Maya had met her during her public health residency, and Sarah's work with Doctors Without Borders made her the perfect person to understand the global implications of Cordelia's research. "Maya! Elena!" Sarah called out, her excitement evident even from a distance. "I still can't believe what you described in those files you sent." As the group made their way up the path to the villa, Maya caught sight of James Martinez from the World Health Organization, Dr. Patricia Okafor from the Gates Foundation, and several journalists whose work she respected. Each person stepping onto their island represented another chance to ensure Cordelia's discoveries would reach the people who needed them most. Elena had insisted on the media presence, despite Maya's initial reluctance. "If we're going to do this," she'd argued, "we need the world watching. It's the only way to make sure the research stays in the public domain." Now, seeing the diverse group of doctors, researchers and advocates walking toward their great-aunt's villa, Maya understood Elena's wisdom. This wasn't just about honoring Cordelia's legacy. It was about creating a new model for medical research, one that prioritized human need over profit margins. "Welcome to Cordelia Island," Maya announced, as the group gathered on the terrace. "I think our great-aunt would be amazed to see all of you here." Elena stepped forward, her journalist's instincts taking over. "Before we show you the laboratory, we want you to understand why this place exists, and why the work that happens here will never be owned by any corporation or locked behind patents that put profit before people." The sun climbed higher as they began to tell Cordelia's story, two sisters finally united in purpose, ready to change the world their children would inherit.